When this boy meets world.
What up, bros?
What up, bros?
And welcome to Bruh Meets World Pod Meets World React.
Woo! I'm
When it's a Bruh Meets World Pod Meets World React.
yeah.
Okay, just so you guys know, we are recording this.
Woo.
We are
I'm
recording this
hot. I'm sweating. I'm sweating.
February 25th, which is one day after the Bruh Meets Maitland, sorry, the Pod Meets Maitland Ward episode, which was released on February 24th, 2025. It was a very interesting episode. We know that you guys came.
Siege. I'm not kidding you. It took me 5 hours to listen to this podcast.
No, I'm well aware.
I was uncomfortable. I was
Yes.
full-blown sweats.
Yes.
I had to push pause many times and just do an anxious walk.
Absolutely.
Hot for a walk.
I listened to it when it first came out. I listened to it at the gym, and at a certain point in time, and what's funny to me is from what I've seen, especially from like everyone's screenshot, it seems to be around like the same time where so many people were like, honestly, when it got to this point, I just had to pause it and walk away. And like you said, like I paused it. I was like, I need a different energy while I'm at the gym because I can't have this just be like how I start my morning. And then I got messages throughout the day from everyone being like, "Did you hear it? Did you finish it? It has been a ride." And I'm really excited to talk about this because I have to say I have a lot of thoughts compared to what I'm seeing online.
I have a lot of thoughts as well. I have a lot of takes.
Yeah.
But what I will say is bravo for just doing the damn episode. You know, when we were doing our season 5 recap, we always end our recap with like it would be nice if you could get this person on. And we were like, well, we have to throw in Maitland in that list, right? Like, and we knew it was something was going on, something was uncomfortable. We didn't understand the details, but we kind of sensed like, oh, it's kind of uncomfortable to ask to bring her on. But you know, bravo for them to just be like, let's attack it head on.
Well, speaking of, I'll say this. It's really funny because a lot of people have asked us, "Oh, did you guys interview Maitland?" Like, you know, we have like a lot of side episodes where we interview cast members or we interview people who were writers. And so the question was asked, have we ever interviewed Maitland? And I was like, no, we reached out, but we never heard back. And then this interview, I was like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm glad we never heard back because it like what was like waiting and what was like being kept at bay for her just came out, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I was experienced enough to handle that level at the time, because it does seem deeply rooted, everything that had to go on, and so I'm really excited to talk about that. I do want to start by saying, I personally am going to say a lot of stuff that we're about to talk about, I feel is very sensitive and it is very opinion oriented. I, as an individual, do not know Maitland. I, as an individual, have very minor interactions with Danielle, so I cannot speak to them or their characters as individuals 365 days a year. That said, Boy Meets World has obviously changed our lives. Pod Meets World, obviously, we've had a connection with, and we have been on their show several times. So these are things that you and I are equally grateful for the opportunity, and they've given us a platform and they've raised our visibility, all of these things. That said,
Asterisk,
I have
asterisk, asterisk.
asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I have opinions and I have thoughts as an objective viewer and as someone who has seen behind the scenes of the industry, of podcasting, and of friendships in general. And I just think that a lot of people are running with a narrative that makes them feel comfortable. So that's what I'm gonna go.
Here's what I'll just say. You know, much like when we did our Nickelodeon episodes or any of those other things that kind of tackled more serious subject matters. The point of this conversation isn't to exploit something that's in the press right now, but more so to just decompress this as a fan base because
Correct.
holy shit. Mom and dad were fighting at the dinner table and it was uncomfortable. Let's talk about it.
Absolutely. And I love that you said that. All right. So actually, let's just talk about the Maitland Ward episode in general. I know that you guys came here for our takes on the drama, but there were a few things that Maitland said in the interview that I thought were worth us talking about before we even get to that.
Oh,
So
I would just like to say, up until about the hour 5 mark,
yeah,
I thought it was a riveting interview about a actress who went into the adult entertainment industry. I thought that they handled all of those questions so well. I was really interested in knowing a lot of these things. These are things that you and I have asked questions about. And that part of the interview, no notes. Chef's kiss.
absolutely. Oh, well, actually, so I have notes, but I will say it was very interesting to hear her journey and hear how she got on the show. I had no idea. Like, to be honest, I think we had talked about this when we did our classroom roll call, that she was in 250 episodes of Bold and the Beautiful. But I honestly, like, I don't think I actually like took that in or like made note of that.
Or
And
probably
the fact that
realized it was in such a short time period.
exactly. Or the fact that she was so young when she started.
Yeah.
And then this idea of her not even having to audition. Like Michael just was kind of like, nope, you didn't get this role, but I have something for you. I'm gonna make it happen. And then giving her like this reversed inverse Three's Company type setup to like begin the her appearance on the series. I thought all of that was very interesting and very fascinating. I also liked that right from the beginning, we see some things where we're like, God, classic Hollywood, man. I just nobody was watching anything because the idea of her being like, oh yeah, and then like the people who were like 24, 28, who play my boyfriends would like come to my school plays. And Ryder is just like, oh boy.
Yeah.
like immediately. And I was like, oh. So I already saw a sense of there are things that you and I would be uncomfortable with and would probably want to dive deeper into, that she seems pretty okay with. And that from the beginning told me what kind of interview that we were going to have. What were your thoughts?
I thought that they were really going to dance around a lot of the like porn questions.
Adult. Yeah.
And here's the thing I will say is that they were very careful to refer to it as adult entertainment. Maitland was
Yeah.
the one who referred to it as porn, which I also thought was like very respectful. It's like I always thought that their discomfort with each other stemmed from her deciding to do something that was very anti-Disney, anti-family friendly. And that didn't seem to be the root of it at all. Fucking just like most of our elections, guys, it's fucking Facebook.
You're right. You're right. Facebook is the commonality in all of these things. But we'll get to that. Then like there were other things like just in the Maitland interview that I thought were like really interesting. On top of the fact of her not having to audition, the story of her having to change in front of the
Sure.
writers and producers and like basically all of the behind the scenes staff. Again, it was like things where you're like, why are we doing this?
You
So
know,
again, I just
there's something I wanted to note that they didn't really touch on, but I find to be an interesting common denominator amongst the cast, with the exception of Danielle. You know, she was talking about how she was, while she was a teenager, dating much older men.
yeah.
And, Ryder talked about doing the same thing. Will was talking about dating older men.
Yeah.
It's like no one kind of addressed like how it was like a little weird, but something that they all had in common as well. And how that may have affected her other relationships or whatever. Like it was just like a very interesting thing that like they touched on briefly that I was like, oh, this is actually something you guys have in common. Instead of it just being like this, like, oh, can I ask you about these taboos kind of questions, you know?
But no, and that's why I bring it up is because in reality, it is very interesting to me. To me, it paints a picture of why someone like her wants to take control of the narrative in terms of her body and how she
Sure.
uses her body. It sounds to me like she's been sexualized since a very young age. And you and I have talked very often about how like Will and Ryder are like, oh, I used to date older all the time, and they see it as a badge of honor. And it's just like, yeah, but just like Ryder took like a deep breath when he heard like the 24 and 28-year-olds were going to our high school plays. It's kind of the same thing when you're like, oh, I was dating 30-year-olds as I was 20. It's like, I need you to like really examine that and think about
Yeah.
what that implies and what you consider normalized. And to that point, I also want to say that Ryder and Will, and even Danielle to some extent, you and I have had conversations with them about really serious adult topics. And I felt this, I'm telling you how I felt leading up to the argument. I was listening to them talk about like the adult content part and like the making the jokes and like all this other stuff. And I was like, I'm sure they mean well, but they just have a I don't it's not a sheltered approach to things, but they really seem like removed from a lot of things that are commonplace to the everyday person. And what I mean by that is something like OnlyFans. Something like Will's questions about OnlyFans were genuine, I believe, but they also were like, "Oh, have you not been on a computer in the last 10 years?" You
But for
know?
Will, the answer to that question may be yes, in all fairness.
No, and again, I said the answer is yes, but if you are someone who is seasoned and like OnlyFans is your life, it feels a little voyeuristic, does it not? Like
Yeah.
that's what it felt like to me. Like I was listening to it being like, "Oh, you are asking questions and you are being respectful," but it also does kind of feel like you're being like, "Oh, so you're part of the circus." You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you know what? That's a very valid point. I have to say it didn't bother me, but I was aware of what you're talking about as it was happening. But I have to also say, like, I was kind of curious about some of these things as well. And I think from this, her speaking on this in this fan base is a new thing. So she's kind of
Oh,
speaking,
100%.
introducing probably many other people to topics that maybe they're unfamiliar with. And I actually liked that they were kind of joking around with each other, wet the dick, like all that stuff. I was having fun with that. Honestly, did not bother me.
I didn't say that I had a problem with wet the dick because like wet the dick, the do you have a gum wall? That's not gum. Like all of those things, it's true to them, and I think it's great that they stay true to them. I'm saying, and I'm saying this to you because we're obviously going to get to like the more contentious piece. I'm asking you as someone who has also tried to have conversations with them, do you not feel like sometimes you're like, oh, I can't go there with you. Like you're not at the same level of understanding as a more everyday person would be.
Yeah, I mean, this was definitely like a group of Christians finding out their friend from high school is a swinger. Like
Correct.
that's the vibe of that whole conversation. And yes, I'm sure to people who are kind of have a more liberal history with their sexuality, like this could have been a very dumbed down conversation in that regard. So yes, I agree to that.
And the only reason why I'm mentioning that is because to me, this entire interview was a pressure cooker, and it was like a small thing that like kept slowly building. And if you think that everything's just going along swell the entire time, then it does kind of come out of left field. But if you are kind
I
of noting the way that the conversation was going from the beginning, I feel like when things popped off, you're like, well, actually, yes. So what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say that they were talking about, her Boy Meets World stuff, her history in the adult industry, whatever, for a good chunk of this podcast. I was not like looking to see how long the podcast was. So by the time it got to like that hour mark, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, they're wrapping up soon. And then Danielle drops the question that the world
Okay,
heard.
okay, and here's the thing, that's important because the way that Danielle starts off the conversation. Now, I will say, anyone who listens to Pod Meets World knows that this is how Danielle approaches that kind of conversation. Danielle is like, to me, it's sarcastic, it's a little self-deprecating. It's like, hey, do you hate us? Like I'm just gonna like be upfront with it. Like that's her approach, and she does this in several different episodes. But again, to me, you have to know that, and you have to be kind of comfortable with that approach. If you actually do have beef with someone and they're just like, yo, you got a problem with me? How are you going to react?
Can I ask you a little fun question before we really get into the section of the podcast?
Yes.
Before we get into the details, are you team Danielle or team Maitland or team neither?
I personally,
or both, I should say. Neither or both.
I was going to message you and ask you the same question. I will say this up front, and I will make my case. I personally am team neither. Like, I'm team, I see both sides, and I feel like both sides were wrong. That's where I'm at. Where are you at?
You know what? I was going to say both. So maybe in the more positive light. I see this from both of their perspectives, and I kind of understand it from both perspectives. And I think there was things that, because it was so heated, they weren't able to digest and change their misinterpretations of things that happened in the past.
Absolutely correct. And so, all right, thank you. So now I'm going to talk about what I really, really want to talk about, which is to me, the interview. I feel like I see both sides. I feel like I have things that I want to say about how Danielle approached this. I have things that I want to say about Maitland and her interaction with this. But ultimately, I want to really speak about what I'm seeing online, which to me is this narrative that Maitland is the only one at fault. And the reason why I want to address that is because I need people to look at the power dynamic of this situation. So many people came into this and they were like, Maitland, she only did this for the ratings, rock the stats. That's what Danielle, like, she's just a troublemaker. She came in, blah, 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 blah. I was like, Danielle runs this podcast, reviews this podcast, she edits this podcast, and she distributes this podcast. So this was not a live recording. We did not all sit down and watch it happen in real time. You and I both know that they record these things in advance. So if they wanted to take this section out, they could have. They did not take it out. They actually could have skipped the entire episode. None of us knew that Maitland was actually being interviewed or when it happened. They knew about it. They released it. And we know them well enough to know that they were well aware that this would get coverage, because anything that Danielle, especially, but anything that the pod does that's like a huge bomb, gets news coverage. So the idea that everyone was like, oh, Maitland did this for clout, without realizing that Danielle is the distributor, I just have a problem with that. To me, it is a power imbalance, and it's everyone not actually thinking about the industry and the fact that both individuals had a hand in this.
Well, I think this is part of where the problem stems from, which is not the podcast itself, but how the podcast is viewed by people who don't listen to the podcast, which is a very important take, because many people don't. I mean, we do our Pod Meets World like review episodes. These things are like an hour and a half twice a week. It's a lot of content. Like, a lot of people don't have that kind of time. So when do they hear about the show? When it shows up in the media. When does it show up in the media? When they're tackling a topic that's controversial, but the media often skews towards a negative angle. So understanding all of that made me understand Maitland's position so much more in all of this. 100%. Here is someone who was like, hey, we're launching a podcast. Do you think you'll be involved? Sure. Doesn't hear back from them for over a year or so. She hears about all these other people who are getting invited, and it starts to pick at her because she always felt like Danielle didn't like her because of this Facebook debacle thing. I don't really think that's the thing. I think the big thing is the fact that Will, who I have to give a hand to, says this is on me. I didn't communicate this. And that is kind of a dick thing to do for you to say, like, would you be interested in doing our podcast, but not say, like, communicate, hey, this is how we're going to do it. It doesn't really make sense to bring you on now. We're going to bring you on when your character appears. She had no understanding of that. She's not listening to the podcast. All she hears is Boy Meets World podcast, talks about Ben Savage, talks about Michael Jacobs, talks about, this happening on the set. So to her, it's like, oh, you guys just want drama and ratings. Okay, well, let's just save our conversation for that then, because it'll be good ratings. That's what you guys want, right?
Well, here's the thing. Also, here's the thing. But the ratings thing, the rock the stats is going to bother me for a few reasons. One, Danielle says, I wanted to have this conversation. A lot of people are hung up on having this conversation on the mic versus having it one-on-one.
Sure.
And my stance is, and this is like me talking about arguments in general, especially between two individuals who you do not trust. Mm-hmm. She was like, I did not think you were being genuine. I thought you were being disingenuous. So I did not want to have a one-on-one conversation with you because I don't believe you. I think that is the most important tool of this. Everyone's like, why didn't she have a one-on-one conversation with her? I don't believe you. I don't believe that what you're doing is genuine. And
because from Maitland's perspective, it was, hey, we're launching this podcast. Hey, the show is about to get a ton of press. And hey, Danielle wants to mend things right now.
Correct.
I could understand why she would be like, oh, well, that just feels like she's trying to do it before people start talking about us again. And there was never a moment where they acknowledged that perspective.
Correct. All right. So let's look at the timeline if you are Maitland. You invite Danielle to your wedding. She goes to your wedding. A few years later, Girl Meets World gets announced. You go to reach out to her. You find out you're not friends anymore on Facebook. Which, again, I know lots of people have problems with this point, but we're going to come back to it. You find out you're not friends anymore on Facebook. So you send her a message anyway saying, hey, I just wanted you to know congratulations on all your success, blah, 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 blah. You never hear back. Then you go to set and you're like, hi, and that person ignores you. At that point in time, you have a lot of evidence saying, oh, this person don't fuck with me. So are you going to have kind words? Are you going to care about what that person's doing? No, because as far as you know, you feel like this person has a slight against you.
Yeah.
And every instance that you have only reinforces that. Now, is it completely possible that Danielle never saw her message? Yes. Is it completely possible that Danielle was like, look, Girl Meets World was not a good time for me. And actually, I probably was like focused so I could get in and get out. And I didn't even notice that I wasn't saying hi to you.
And Danielle has talked about that on the podcast multiple times about how she really wasn't present on the set of that show. And to her, point, she did apologize for being like, hey, I had other stuff going on. If I was rude to you, I apologize.
Correct. All of those things, I think, are they make sense to me. Mm-hmm. But also, you enslight me.
Yeah.
And this is not the first time I'm speaking to you in years. So I think that Maitland was deeply hurt. And again, if you're going to invite someone to your wedding and then that person's not speaking to you and
doesn't even tell you why,
doesn't tell you why, for years you don't hear from them, then when they're like, hey, I'm doing a project that involves you, and reach out to you and like, hey, can we apologize and make good before the podcast? Another thing, when Will and Maitland first had the conversation, Pod Meets World was not out. So the success of it, the ratings, what everyone's talking about, that was not a factor because no one understood where Pod Meets World would go. So all of that to me tracks.
Well, I would also say that who knows if Maitland was completely like serious when she said that. Maybe she'd be like, oh yeah, maybe she meant it disingenuously. Like she meant it as a joke.
When I heard Rock the Stats, my first thought was that sounds like something you say jokingly. It's like, save it for the podcast. We'll get the numbers up because you don't have any numbers at this point in time. That's what I'm getting.
I feel like this is a big misunderstanding between creatives, which is Danielle's like, hey, I want to kind of have a personal conversation with you just to make sure as individuals separate from everything going on, we're cool.
Yeah.
Maitland's hears, they want to interview you for the podcast. Well, I only have so many things I can talk to him about. And we're going to record soon? Question mark. I don't know. We'll just save it. And let me just say something to that. I am very similar. You and I both know that when we do any episode of Bra Meets World, we can't talk before I push record because we'll instantly start saying everything that we want to save for the podcast. And I can understand if Maitland had that perspective. Again, I'm not Team Maitland. I just understand the perspective.
Completely, I'm with you. What I'm saying is Maitland at this point in time, she's doing OnlyFans. She understands marketing. She understands sensationalism. Like, she gets that. And the podcast is not out when we first start talking about this. So for her to say all this other stuff, she's like, yeah, we'll do what we need to do. Now, cut to 3 years later.
Well, I'm sorry. Can I just, before we cut forward, I'm going to go back in time. Right when the podcast was being announced, instantly part of that rumor mill was their beef with Ben because Ben wasn't going to be a part of the podcast and everyone was curious, and it was like the first bit of press they ever got was them addressing the Ben Savage stuff. So like at that time I could understand why Maitland might feel
the first season we have, like, I think we all have to remember at the end of the first season when we first go on there, they are dealing with their feelings about Michael Jacobs.
Yeah.
And being like, hey, I'm actually starting to remember some stuff. Some kind of suppressed memories are coming up. And I have to say, I don't feel good about my relationship with this man. Now, since then, they have absolutely been like, you know what? Ultimately, Michael was doing what he could. I believe that he thought that he was actually helping us out. I don't agree with some of the approaches that he took, but they have come around to at least respecting Michael and Michael's approach and Ben's comedic talent. Like, all of these things are things that they have come around to, but they absolutely were like, I don't fuck with Michael in the first season.
And you know what? Here's what I wish is that, because I feel like Maitland was really asking them to be kind of empathetic to this idea that she was kind of trying to build a friendship with Danielle that she felt like was one-sided, wasn't going anywhere, and she was slighted from it, right? But I also feel like Maitland was kind of ignoring the fact that these three individuals have a much more nuanced relationship with Michael Jacobs because they spent their childhoods with him. And I like her working with him for 2 years, her having a good first impression of like, I'm gonna write a role just for you. Like, just because you had a great relationship with the person in Hollywood doesn't mean that everyone else did. And I wish that she would have just had a little bit more empathy for them for having that kind of relationship with him.
I agree. Like, to me, I was like, this is why I was like, I'm team nobody, because Maitland, in my opinion, she is like, you guys have a problem with Ben, you guys have a problem with Michael, and they're like, no, we don't. We've only talked positively about Ben. And Will said his whole thing about like missing Ben and like the fact. But I'm going to say a few things. One is that they absolutely, in the beginning, as you said, the coverage of the podcast was they don't fuck with Michael, Ben doesn't fuck with them. That was the first few. And if those are the two people you're closest with, then obviously you're going to feel some animosity. Sure. And then on top of that, you and I have seen and listened to podcast interactions where people have said, I thought you didn't like me. Trina had some unresolved issues with them. Joey and Frankie were like, hey, we kind of thought you guys thought you were better than us. There have been guest stars who have been like, oh, I thought you felt XYZ way about me. So if not everyone, but if more than one person feels this way, I do not think it's intentional. But from what we've seen, they have a good bond. They have a good rapport. They have a history with each other. So it's going to feel like an outsider looking in.
I think that, that was something else that maybe even the boys could have maybe spoken up to a little bit more, saying like, hey, this has actually happened quite a bit where people have told us that we've, rubbed them the wrong way. We didn't have an awareness or an understanding of the situation. A lot of times there's miscommunications between like second and third parties, yada, yada, yada. And we can own up to that and we can apologize for that because we're now learning in our adult age that this was something that we did unintentionally when we were younger. And I don't think there was ever a moment of awareness there on their behalf.
Yeah, like so for example, you just hit on something that I thought was really important. The most important thing to me, or kind of one of the top things to me, is that both Danielle and Maitland are going off of a game of telephone. Maitland is like, I like the what I heard was like Maitland was like, "Oh, you were jealous of me. You were." I was like, "Where did that come from?" I guarantee you, someone told her that.
Yeah.
Someone was like, "Oh, she's feeling this way because of XYZ," or like that's why she doesn't fuck with you. That's why Girl Meets World, she's ignoring you. She's getting that reinforced, and as you were saying earlier, she is hearing through the media that they are shit talking Ben and they are shit talking Michael. So from her perspective, these are people who are clout chasers. Now, Danielle is like,
We
oh, Danielle is like, I was told that you wanted to rock the stats. I was told that you had something to say about me. So this is all I was told. I was told I feel. I was told I feel. Nobody is working in facts.
Yeah.
Nobody is actually being objective and saying, hey, that's not actually how I felt, but that's what I was told, and it makes me feel this way. And
I
that's why I'm saying what I'm saying.
Yeah, like there's so much of that that's clearly going on amongst that whole cast and crew that was going
Yes.
on at the time. And I think again that speaks towards the leadership and that should be something that they're able to freely criticize, but whatever. Oh,
Really quickly, I just
yeah.
want to like give the listeners an example. If we remember, Trina was told that they didn't want her in the finale. And they were
Yeah.
like, what? We never said that. And so to me, again, I'm not naming names. I am saying that there seems to be a culture of these
Stirring the
people
pot.
they are being protected. Will, Danielle, and Ryder are being protected, and people who are close to them are painting a different narrative. And that
Yeah.
is quite common in Hollywood. And a huge part to me about this is the reason why I'm bothered by it is because I do not think that Danielle intentionally was going after Maitland or trying to make her feel bad. However, I do feel like the response is more of the same. It's more of people being like, well, Danielle's America's sweetheart, and this is an OnlyFans actor. So who are they siding with? They're siding with the person that they have a more of a connection with,
Sure.
and not enough people are stepping back and being like, honestly, you're both adults, and I expect more.
Again, the tea is piping hot. It is
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
from Danielle's perspective, like I don't know how a lot of the I don't think a lot of the earliest stuff is her fault. I can understand how she's like this person I basically went to high school with invited me to their wedding. I haven't talked to them since. It was nice that they did. It would be good to see the old gang. I'll
Yeah,
show up. Oh, maybe I was detoxing my Facebook, which by the way, we all have done. You're
yes.
not better than anyone because you have 1,000 randos. Um, and she's just like, we don't talk. We never talked. We were never close. And to her, I can understand why she's like, I don't know why you were expecting more of me when
Correct.
we never had that to begin with. It was never something we had. We were coworkers. And
Correct.
I don't think there was a point where Maitland kind of understood that, like, you know, there wasn't that foundational relationship like there maybe was with Danielle and Trina.
Yes. And to that point, I will say that I feel very deeply that Maitland felt closer to Danielle than Danielle felt to Maitland.
Mm-hmm.
And so it came as a shock to Danielle that Maitland would even care that they
Sure.
weren't. It's this idea of like, you unfriended me on Facebook. And she's like, so what? Like, there's probably a bunch of people I unfriended. It's like, yeah, but that's because you never saw this as more than anything than a casual friendship. Whereas Maitland thought you were closer. And if you think you're closer to someone and they dismiss you, you're hurt by that. I heard two hurt people. I heard
Yeah.
two hurt women who, by the way, I think it's really important to note, they are both strong personalities. They are both leaders in their industries, and they are both probably used to being talked to a specific way by men. So when you're in those industries and you're a woman, you are like a look, I'm not going to back down. To me, the moment Danielle was like, so do you hate us? And Maitland responded with, no, but you hate me. You unfriended me. It reminded me of Ellen and Dakota Johnson when
Yeah.
Ellen was like, oh, you didn't invite me to your birthday party. And Dakota was like, yes, I did. And again, I think the difference is people were Team Dakota because they were not fans of Ellen.
Well, I just
people
think it's
had
kind
gotten
of
tired of Ellen.
immature to pick a team at all because it's so clearly like a blatant misunderstanding. I
Correct.
never saw this message. You've never talked to me in so many years. The last interaction we had was negative for me. Oh, I didn't realize I left a negative impression on you. Like, there's so much that could have just been resolved in like, just kind of taking a step back, breathing. But clearly there was a lot of tension built up. There's a second thing. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. There's something that I have to talk about that is just like on the like so clear as day. And we talked about this when we did our recap of the prank war episodes, which is there is so much of the tension of that cast infused in that episode that felt so real in this podcast episode. It felt like you could have taken Rachel McGuire and Topanga Lawrence out of that episode, and this is the fight they would be having in the future episode.
No, to your point, one of the things that I wrote is they have a way of talking to each other. And as someone who listens to a lot of podcasts, Danielle, Will, and Ryder, they have a way, they talk to each other, they talk over each other. It's like, it's playful, but it's confrontational if you're not used to it. To me, I think part of this was just the fact of like the familiarity versus a guest. Like Danielle approached this like she would approach any other conversation with
I
Will's
disagree.
voice.
Wait.
You,
In my heart, disagree with that. But I'll
wait.
continue.
What do you mean you disagree? And I want to know because I'm about to go somewhere with this.
Oh, because I don't think that this was prepared for like any other interview. I think that they were very careful with their questioning. I think they were very strategic about when they were going to approach things, and I do think that the TMZ stuff, the always in the press talking shit about us, like was rubbing Danielle the wrong way, and she had feelings about it and wanted to confront it head on.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is the way that she asked the first question
was very antagonistic. Yes,
it was very, very much, but it was antagonistic, but it was also very much how she approaches conversations with Will or Ryder.
Yeah.
If Will and Ryder are going back and forth, they just talk to each other like we just saw. There have been episodes where we were like, oh, the two of them are kind of like they have different opinions. They're really strongly. And to me, the thing is, we're used to Danielle being the mediator in that. And this time, she wasn't the mediator. She was part of the argument. And because she was part of the argument, I think it stood out more because everyone else knows her to be the mediator type.
I just think it was interesting because, I think from that very first question, do you hate us? You could have gone somewhere different with it. It could have been a joking thing. I think it could have also been like a ha kind of way to approach a very uncomfortable conversation. And it could have been like no, I thought you hated me. Oh, hold on a second. Let's talk about it. It felt like it immediately got a little nasty.
Well, and here's the thing. I think that, and this is my opinion, I think that both of them were like, you're trying to paint me as the bad guy. Yeah. And instead of either one being like, do we have it wrong? Is there something we're missing? Both of them. And I do say both of them.
Yeah.
Because when I've heard so many people be like, Maitland wouldn't let it go. You know who also wouldn't let it go? Danielle. The number of times Danielle was like, but you came on to rock the stats. You wanted to rock the. I was like, you are the host of this podcast.
Yeah.
You can actually, like, if Maitland said, actually, no, I don't agree with you. I felt XYZ sort of way. You could have been like, I think that's really unfortunate. And hopefully You and I can come to some kind of resolve later. She could have quelled it at any point in time. A lot of people are saying Maitland could have stopped and let go at any point in time. This is not Maitland's show. Maitland is not the host. Danielle is. This is what I'm talking about. Danielle is the host of this show. And as a host, I was like, you could have ended this at any point in time. You also, as you were saying, Tony, you had feelings, you had gripes. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have aired them. I'm saying that as far as the interview goes, as far as the episode goes, there was enough in the first half for us to end it on a positive note. When things got tense, there was enough for you to be like, honestly, I disagree and I've heard some things, but ultimately, that's not what we're here about. We're here to talk about Boy Meets World, and that's what I want to focus on. And if you and I can't have a professional relationship, a close relationship, let's have a professional one. You can do that. Danielle chose not to. And I'm not saying that she should just roll over. I'm saying
I don't know that she chose not to. I felt like she was very clear that, like, hey, I know that we aren't agreeing on this, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't want to work with you again or have you back on the podcast. And I do feel like
that was after the tension.
Sure.
After the tension.
Yes. And I'll say that. But I also do think that it was an important thing for her to say. And it was an important thing to understand that last point she was trying to make of, I don't have to like someone to respect them, to work with them. I don't have to be best friends with them either. Like,
no, you and I know this. Like, I firmly believe work is work. You do not have to be friends with everyone. You can respect their work.
Yeah.
I already heard that Maitland's like, I'd go back on Pod Meets World. I feel like, again, to me, this does not get released unless everyone has agreed to let it be released. That's how I feel. Like, this, it doesn't go out unless everyone's like, you know what? Fine. Like, we understand where it's at. We understand the pushback that we're going to get, but ultimately, this is not that big of a deal. We're going to move forward. Like,
hey, can I just say something else that a lot of people don't understand too? When you're doing like an interview with the cast on Boy Meets World, Pod Meets World, or whatever, when you see like the little viral clips, you only see the little windows of the cast, but actually it's a massive Zoom meeting where their entire production team is on with their cameras off. So it was very much like a fight at like a work meeting in front of like a bunch of people, not just an intimate gathering with like an old cast. I just want to make that distinction as well.
And that's my point. My point is that I am, and I will say this very confidently, I am disappointed in Danielle as a host. I think that as a person, as someone who was slighted, she did what she needed to do. I feel like I'm a lot of people are like, she was being attacked. I was like, I don't know if you're being attacked on your own show. I don't. And if you are, I think that you are well within your rights to push back. But you yourself, to me, it felt very much like Danielle felt slighted and she felt the need to rectify it, because there's one point in particular where I'm like, okay, this is a little mean girlish. When Maitland goes, you were jealous about the attention I was getting on set. And Danielle goes, I was on the cover of Maxim that year. I was like, okay, was that necessary? I was like, was that necessary? I'm not saying that you weren't. I'm saying you were like, I'm on the cover of magazines right now. I don't need your approval. I don't need to compete with you. And that may be true, but in this moment, is that solution seeking? You know?
Here's what I'll just say. I think I have a softer approach to both of them, and this is why I say I'm team both. Because yes, there was a lot of mistakes that happened within that interview. Here's what I'll also say. That confronting someone that you have bad blood with is not an easy thing to do. And we live in a culture that's very avoidant. And a lot of people would rather just not even try to approach, to mend, to repair a relationship because of the discomfort that can come from that confrontation. And so understanding that's the world we live in, I think it was actually a really brave and a very solid attempt to try to repair a relationship with a conversation that actually didn't go very well. And I think that both of them have their reasons for why they felt the way they felt. And I think as listeners, we could understand those different perspectives that maybe they couldn't because they were too in the heat of it. Um, and I would just ask people who are judging them very harshly to think about the last time they tried to have a hard conversation with someone like this to see how well it went for them before they start kind of, being too critical or harsh.
Well, so to your point, I want to make sure that I say this as well, because while I was disappointed in Danielle as a host, I want to say I can be disappointed in Danielle and still be a huge fan of Danielle.
Sure. Yep.
And what I mean by that is someone was like, I think they were being immature. And I was like, that's allowed. You're allowed to be immature even as an adult. Like, you're allowed to have feelings about someone slighting you. No one is saying that you should not have feelings. No one is saying that at a certain age you have to let everything go, because that's not how it works. If you were upset that someone unfriended you on Facebook 5 years ago, anyone who has siblings will tell you, yes, sometimes the small gripe lasts
Yeah.
for years and you're not over it because it's indicative of something larger. And I feel like a lot of this was them having the conversation that they needed to have, and them both coming to the conclusion that you feel the way that you feel, I feel the way that I feel justified. I don't feel like you're justified. But at the end of the day, we both recorded this. We're willing to put it out there, and we're both willing to deal with whatever kind of publicity we get from it. That's where I'm at with it. And I feel like that's allowed. I will always come back to the fact of I need people to honestly look at everyone who is involved in this and not be like, oh, this person did everything right and this person did everything wrong.
Sure.
Because in reality, these are both very savvy individuals who work for very prominent companies, and everyone, like, I listened to this and I was like, oh, they knew this would get news coverage. Everyone was aware that this would get coverage. And if they didn't want it to be involved, if either party did not want this released, it would not have gotten released. So think about that when you are saying this person is to blame for it getting out of control, or for us having access to that conversation.
Can I throw out a completely different take that we haven't talked about yet?
Let's go.
Guys, look around, look around. How lucky we are to be alive right now. Because if we were television fans in the 70s, in the 80s, we would be watching shows and having questions about things and never getting any follow-up. Boy Meets World fans are eating so damn good. Any question that we had, all the questions that we asked in our podcast, they're actually answering and getting into the nitty-gritty of it and explaining things in such a way that I think helps fill in gaps. Like, for example, what we talked about in terms of Rachel's character on Boy Meets World, how she was being written, how she felt, how there seemed to be a separation between her and the other girls on the show, even though they tried to build a relationship. All of that feels like it was mirrored, or like either before, during, or after in real life. So it's just one of those things where I'm glad that as fans of this show, we can have some of our questions answered and, understand these things a little bit better.
Ultimately, yeah, I think that, to me, I don't know how to say this other than, like, I want Boy Meets World fans to grow up. Like, I want people
Sure.
to understand that these are adults. Adults have arguments. Adults still have immature conversations. Adults still have feelings about being slighted. Adults don't always agree with each other, and they don't have the relationship that you see on television.
Well,
And for people who are like, hold on really quickly, for people who are like, oh, I want Ben to be on, it's like, do you think that this is going to be a love fest if Ben has made it clear that he does not want to be on the show? I feel like it would go more like it did with Maitland than with anything else if they were going to be honest. And that's my thing is this this is a show about high school. You are not in a high school. So I need everyone to actually look at this objectively and be like, these are two individuals who were both feeling hurt. I hear hurt on both ends. I hear misunderstanding on both ends. And I hear um, both individuals wanting to protect themselves in an industry where women are often pitted against each other. So
Sure.
that means that we're going to have moments like this, and everything isn't all gravy. All cast members don't love each other. And as Danielle said, that does not mean that they can't work together in the future.
Here's what I guess my final thought on all of this, which is I think the show in terms of Pod Meets World is just in a different age now than it was when it started. I think
Yes.
during the pandemic, we were also hungry for content. There was a lot of cast and show reunions going on. There was many podcasts, recaps happening, and it was a very fun and popular thing, especially during a time where we didn't have television, didn't have movies, and we were really anxious for content, right? So the idea that this show kind of sprung during, or shortly after the worst of COVID makes sense to me. I just think that now, unfortunately, with shows like Ned's Declassified and with all these other things going on and other podcasters, drama with the One Tree Hill girls and all this stuff, like, I just think that these types of podcasts have gotten a bad reputation. And unfortunately, I think that Boy Meets World's podcast gets lumped into there because of the TMZ articles and the things that get popularized. But it's unfortunate because I truly feel that like the people like us who listen to this podcast all the time understand that it's actually a very nuanced approach to complex issues of childhood stars. And so I think that's probably the most unfortunate thing, is that like we understand a lot more of this because we're in it and we're hearing these conversations they're having all the time, but we just can't ignore the public perception anymore that, these podcasts are all about starting drama and trying to stay relevant in a world where people may have forgotten about your show.
Well, not only that, which is great. I love that you pointed it out, but also the news articles. Like, when do they cover the show?
Yeah.
They very rarely cover the show because it's doing like it had like a fun reunion and everyone's so excited. No,
Sure.
They usually, the news outlets covers the show when they want drama.
But that's not the fault of Danielle, Ryder,
I'm not
and
saying
Will.
it is. I'm saying that
because you and I have been a part of that, where it's like we had a conversation with them, and then overnight people are writing articles. No one's reaching out to us for quotes. No one's asking our approval. They're just publishing shit.
No, and my point was not that they are at fault. My point was, in the larger media cycle, if you are a casual listener, if you are not of the Pod Meets World fan club, you only hear about Pod Meets World when there is a big reveal. Going back to what you were saying, I think it's really important to note to Pod Meets World listeners that you yourself are living in a bubble. You have understanding. You are familiar with their intent. You are familiar with how the conversation actually goes. And as millennials, I will say we should be aware enough to be like, when you see a headline that is sensational, look at the full context.
Yeah.
Because, in fact, lots of stories are only about the sensational part and not about everything that led up to it. That's just what I wanted to point out. Like I said, for me, this entire thing was more so about the reaction that I've seen and this choosings of sides and people being like, so-and-so's the worst because they did XYZ. And I was like, you guys, this is a large production. Everyone is involved. These are real feelings with real people, but no one was sneak attacked by this. This is not a live event. Everyone was aware of what was be released and what the public would hear. And personally, I do feel like there was a little bit of weaponizing of public opinion on both sides.
Again, were you not entertained?
Here's the thing. I wasn't. I was uncomfortable. We talked about this.
Yes, I was very uncomfortable. Like I said, it took me 5 hours to listen to it. But again, like, I also just like commend them for doing it at all. Like, the attempt is worth it for me. It's the M. Night Shyamalan attempt. You didn't quite land it, but I appreciate it.
I said this on Reddit. I said that I applaud Maitland for going on the show and having the conversation. Even when it cut out, she got back on.
Sure.
That's so like if that's heated, you don't want to like have some sense of resolve, you don't come back. You don't have to.
Yeah.
He came back on. They ended on a lighter note, and I think that that is bravery on her behalf. And I also think that it is brave of Danielle to be like, honestly, I'm gonna put this out as is.
Yeah.
And like, she could have completely removed it, but they both committed to the interview. They both showed up. They both asked their questions and responded and allowed themselves to be vulnerable in a way that didn't paint either of them in the best light, if you're asking
Sure.
me. And I think, personally, I think that that shows bravery.
Again, yeah. Solid attempt.
Okay. Last thing that I want to say to you as we completely close this out. There was a response by Trina. Do we want to touch on that at all?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to read it verbatim.
Okay.
It says, I have never been more proud of Danielle Fishel in the second half of that show. Speaking clearly and holding your ground is the way I like to handle my business also. That's why I fucks with her. Supporting people doesn't always mean their character will align with yours. Sometimes the ones you uplift only care about their own agenda. They start unnecessary drama, not for truth, but for attention. Media chasers, energy usurpers. Instead of riding with you, they'd rather take the plane down just to make themselves look like the hero in the wreckage. They lie on you when you're at your lowest just for the cent of a dollar. It's a hard lesson, but one I've learned well, and through it, I've grown. Now I look deeper at the purpose behind my support. Healing, not chaos. Elevation, not destruction. Real ones move with integrity. The rest expose themselves. And then Danielle responds to that by saying, wow, thank you, Trina. We have been through a lot, both together and apart. We've come out the other side so much better because of it. I love you. Thoughts?
I appreciate seeing Angela standing up for Topanga. I appreciate seeing their real life friendship that we know had a very rocky part as well, like a chapter as well between the two of them. And I wish that Trina would have, I guess, instead of kind of pouring more fire on there, kind of signal that like, hey, I've been in a similar situation, and on the other side of it is like reconciliation and friendship and all those things. I just wish it would have been a little bit more of a positive vibe. But again, I'm not here to say what a Black woman can and cannot say. So let her speak her truth.
Absolutely. I feel very similar to you, where I was like, I do feel, I just feel like there's a beginning of the podcast and how everyone were behaving and where we are now.
Mhm.
And I can remember that growth.
Yeah.
I can remember that change. And to me, it does feel like everyone's in a better place now. Well, not everyone, obviously, but some people are in better places now. And that, or in different places, let's just say now. And I feel like that can get lost when emotions are involved. And I feel like very, very often in arguments like this, people aren't willing to be objective. They just want to show support to the person that they feel was wronged.
Sure.
And I really appreciate that you and I came up here and we're like, in reality, I see both sides. I see the hurt, I see the pain, I see the needing to defend yourself, I see the totality of everyone, and I also see how Will played a part in this. I see how the media played a part in this, and I personally think that the larger culture and kind of shadowy voices also played a part in this. And that's my opinion.
I really hope it ends positively. Like, wouldn't it be a beautiful thing if, like, at the end of their Pod Meets World podcast was them really reconciling a lot of the negative relationships that they may or may not have had throughout the course of, the show to now.
I think that's possible, but I also think that undermines Danielle's point of I can wish well for you and not fucks with you.
Sure.
I also
and to that point, I feel like this was that. I feel like this was like we're touching base, we're airing our grievances, and we're not agreeing, but that's fine. I still respect you. You do you. And
absolutely.
I that's what I'm taking away from it. So.
Exactly. That's my point. My point is, at the end of the day, Both of them are getting a paycheck. Both of them are just fine. And as you and I have said, I do not know either of these individuals on a personal basis. So there is probably so much more that is going on. And I want people to remember that whenever you are watching an argument from that has been produced, edited, and released for consumption, that this is a product that it may involve real emotions and real individuals, but ultimately you don't know those people. You do not live in their life. You do not see them in the morning, and you have no idea what is going through their mind at night. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. Also, Pod Meets World, can we start doing two-parters? These episodes are long. Just a thought.
Oh, okay. So speaking of you guys, for those of you who have been following us, we will be back with our season 6 Pod Meets World Reacts, where we will be covering what they cover. So if you've enjoyed this, please join our Patreon, where you will hear our reacts to the Pod Meets World episodes. And we have so much more coming for you. Of course, if anything else pops off, we'll come back with another episode. But we just want to say thank you guys for allowing us this conversation. And yeah, I don't know. Dream, try, do good.
Do better.
Do better. Later, bros.
Later, bros.
When this boy meets world.